Good evening. Good evening. The hour is 6 p.m. Having arrived, I call to order this regular meeting of the Municipal Services, Facilities, and Infrastructure Committee. This meeting is being broadcast live on the City of Keene YouTube channel on channel 1302. Video is also being streamed on the city's website and is posted on the website at the end of the next business day, barring any technical difficulties. Copies of the printed agenda are available on the wall pockets as you entered the room. The public and other city councilors will be recognized to ask questions and make comments on the agenda item under discussion. After being recognized, all remarks are to be made through the chair. I will not recognize an individual a second time until everyone has had a chance to speak. Anyone who wishes to address the committee is asked to go to one of the microphones in the room, identify themselves by name and address prior to speaking. Written comments from the public will be accepted at the clerk's office until Tuesday, 1 p.m. Our minute taker is participating remotely this evening, and therefore our committee members make sure to turn on your microphone when speaking. If the minute taker is unable to hear, someone will tell you to speak louder or turn your microphone on. So I now call to order this regular meeting of the M.S.F.I committee, so-called, and I notice that we have a full complement of members, and therefore a quorum is present. No one is participating remotely. So, first item on our agenda this evening is a communication from Councilor Lake. This is regarding the Sidewalk Asset Management Program. So, Councilor Lake, stand, sit, whatever you like.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Brian Lake, City Councilor for Ward 3. Here tonight to ask for an update on the Sidewalk Asset Management Program. This is a really important program to all of our constituents. And given all of the largely rising costs over the last couple of years, and that this program was really put together a couple of years ago, just really looking for an update on if we're on schedule to hit the streets that we had planned for this year, if we're on target for the budget for those streets, and if there's any potential changes that we might need in coming years for how many sidewalks or how much we're gonna have to budget. And it'd be great also to have just a quick overview on how we decided what streets to hit. Because I know everyone probably has some street or road or sidewalk in mind that they'd love to have done. I know I've got mine in Ward 3 that I'd love to see done, but just looking for that update. I know you guys have a long agenda, so I'll keep it short. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. To our city engineer, can you update us on what's the program? How do we decide what sidewalks are constructed, funding, and all the background?
I will do all of that and more, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Great.
I will say it warms my heart to hear councilors asking for updates on this stuff and taking an interest on where we are with infrastructure. So it's very exciting for me. So here we go. Tonight I'm going to start with a quick review of what we talked about in 2021 in terms of our asset management plan for sidewalks. We'll address the work that we've completed since that time, talk about work that we've got coming up in 24, and I'll wrap up with some discussion about cost trends and what we're seeing. So it's a quick review. In 2021, we presented a sidewalk asset management plan to this committee over the course of a couple of meetings. We started with an inventory. We have about 52.8 miles of sidewalk within the city's inventory. 23 of them, give or take, are asphalt, with the balance, about 30 miles worth, being concrete. The overall condition of our network, when you take that sort of weighted average of all of them, was a 67, which isn't too bad. It's, call it a C minus. But if you look a little deeper into those numbers, what you see is there's a pretty stark difference between the condition of our asphalt inventory and the condition of our concrete inventory. So this graphic here shows on the left of all of the sidewalks that we have that are in excellent or good condition, those first two columns, the vast majority are concrete, the blue color. On the right of the chart, you see that the vast majority of sidewalks that we have that are in poor or very poor condition are all the asphalt sidewalks. So it's pretty stark differentiation between how the asphalt and concrete are faring over time. So we set a goal. The goal was, in sort of simple terms, to raise the condition of the network by a letter grade, from a C minus to a B minus, let's call it, or, using the scoring criteria from like a 67 to more like a 77, 80 type range for our network overall. To do that, we suggested we'd have to replace about all of the asphalt sidewalks that were scoring below a 60. We'd replace the concrete sidewalks that were scoring below a 40, and we'd do spot repairs on the concrete sidewalks that were somewhere between a 40 and 60. And in 2021 dollars, we estimated that all of that would cost about $3.2 million. So I get questions a lot about how we prioritize the sidewalks, why we pick what we pick. So the sort of rubric that we came up with and we discussed with the committee in 21 is we have a condition score, we've done an inventory and we've done the inspections, but if we just rank them in terms of worst to best and go down the list, it's going to be awfully disjointed. We're going to be working here, and it might not always make sense in terms of the sidewalks that see the most traffic, that are most needed. So instead, what we said is we're going to take the condition score and we're going to use that. That's going to account for 60% of our weighting. 40% was going to be determined based on how much demand there is for pedestrians to use that particular sidewalk. Now, unfortunately, we don't have like pedestrian counts on any of our sidewalks. We really don't have any tools to collect that data, except for sitting somebody out there and counting all day, and that's not obviously very efficient. So instead, what we did is the demand was basically a GIS exercise. We said, okay, for each segment of sidewalk in the city, we're going to look within a 1/4 mile radius. Within a 1/4 mile, what do you have for pedestrian activity generators? And we looked at commercial zoning districts. We looked at vulnerable populations, things like the 100 Nights Shelter or Keene Housing Facilities. We looked at anchor institutions like churches and that sort of thing. We looked at healthcare facilities, hospitals, medical centers, whatnot, school and daycare, public transit stops, along with recreational facilities, trails, or parks. And for each one of those facilities, those pedestrian traffic generators that you have within a 1/4 mile, we're going to give you 1 point. The most any segment scored in the city was 5 points. So that kind of gives you the range. All the sidewalks were given a score basically between 0 and 5. And that piece of the score accounted for 40% of our weighting criteria. And then we did one last thing. We said, if the inspections show that there's tripping hazards, that there's safety concerns that are more eminently needed, we're going to give you a little boost. We're going to add 10% to your score just to move that up the ranking a little bit. So this slide shows everything that has been done since 2021. And altogether, we've actually completed about 10,700 feet of sidewalk replacements since we had this conversation about the asset management plan. But you should note that, obviously Winchester Street and Roxbury Street are a pretty big portion of that total. So this includes that 2 miles worth of sidewalk that have been replaced actually includes sidewalks that were completed outside of the sidewalk program in the CIP using other project funds. In 2021, or excuse me, in 2022 was really the first year that we put that asset management plan rationale into purpose, into work. And the work that we had, my slides are all formatted a little wonky, sorry. The work that was planned for that year included Adams Street, that was 1,300 feet, Colby, which was another 1,125, and Winchester Street, just the one segment of Winchester Street that's shown there on the slide, that was 675 feet. So we planned a total of 3,100 feet in '22. We had a total budget that year which included the FY22 appropriations, plus program balance that had been accumulating over the years of an additional $213,000. So we had about $355,000 total for that work, and we thought we would get that scope of work done for that budget. In actuality, the bids came in at $403,000. So we weren't able to do everything we had planned to do with those funds. We ended up cutting Winchester Street from the scope and authorizing the contract that way. So we got the contract under the 355, awarded the contract, and we replaced Adams and Colby. The final cost of the contract, when it was all said and done, was about $295,000. So all of our contracts, almost all of our contracts, are unit price contracts, meaning we pay per square yard of concrete and cubic yard of gravel and linear foot of pavement marking and yada, yada, yada. And we measure each one of those things individually and pay accordingly. So there's some items that are in that contract that we don't know the exact quantity and we have to estimate. So it's pretty typical that the contracts end up coming in a little bit less than the bid price, right? Because there's going to be some things like flagging, flagger hours that we might overestimate. Sometimes there's items that we underestimate and we go over on, but overall, we try to make sure we don't underestimate and we have a little bit extra that is left at the end of the contract. So in this case, the actual cost of the work when it was all said and done was $295. The price, if you figure it out on a per linear foot basis, worked out to about $122 a linear foot that year. In 2023, we had planned on a section of Main Street, 1,300 feet down by the cemetery. North Lincoln Street, you see about 1,000 feet. It's actually both sides of North Lincoln Street in that block. And 420 feet on School Street, so for a total of 2,740. And again, the CIP appropriation this year was $272. We had a balance carried forward, that unspent program balance of about $60,000, so $332 altogether. So we went into the bid with a budget of $121 per linear foot, and we thought that was going to be very tight. So we said, School Street probably we're not going to be able to afford. So we actually pulled School Street out of the contract documents in advance of the bid because we were concerned we weren't going to get bids within our budget. So we reduced the scope to $2,320. We got a bid price of $294,000 and change. When it was all said and done, again, once the contract was completed and we had some items that ran under, the total cost was the $257, $258, give or take, with a per linear foot cost over the project of $111,000. So the good news, I guess, is it was actually less than we spent on a per linear foot basis in '22, but we still would not have been able to afford School Street, so we weren't able to add it back in. So that brings us to '24. Right now in the CIP, if you look it up, what's programmed is Belmont, Jennison, and River Street, and those three streets account for 2,150 linear feet. Right now, based on an appropriation this year of $290,000 plus we'll call it 75, program balance carried forward, we've got about $365,000 going into next summer's contract. That actually works out, based on what we're supposed to be doing, to $170 a linear foot. Very optimistic that we're going to get bids less than that. So I think that that's more than we need. And I would like to propose some changes tonight. So what I'm recommending is we push Jennison out 1 year. And I'll explain that in a bit. But we add back in the section of School Street and Winchester Street that we'd previously cut from the program because we weren't able to get it done under budget. And that'll give us a budget for that scope of work of about $135 a linear foot. So I think that's a comfortable place to be for bidding purposes. I don't think it's going to be much less than that, but I think that it's a comfortable place. Jennison Street, I'm suggesting we push out a year. If you look at the CIP right now, you'll see in 2024, we're scheduled to work on Willow Street, and in 2025, we were scheduled to work on Willow Street. In 2026, we had planned on working on Gardner Street. What I'd like to do is consolidate that. They're all kind of in the same neighborhood, so to minimize the ongoing disruption to that neighborhood and kind of get in there, do a bunch of work, and get out of their hair, we're going to reschedule all of that work to happen in 2025. That change will get made as part of the 2025 through 2031 CIP update. But what I'm suggesting tonight is that we push out Jennison and substitute in the projects we've had to push out previously. I know you're not planning on making any actions on this tonight. My plan was to submit an informational memo to the City Council with that proposal, and I assume that if the council doesn't ask me to come explain myself, then we'll go forward with that plan.
Good explanation. Thank you.
And the last slide I've got is on cost escalation. So when we were in the fall of 2021, while we were looking at this plan and we were developing the FY23 CIP, we were using an estimated unit cost for combined sidewalks and curbing, the weighted unit average price of $92 a linear foot. When we got to 22 and we put that out to bid, the bid price worked out to $110 per linear foot. As I mentioned, we came in a little under budget because of those items that ran under. So the total cost ended up being $95 a linear foot. 2023, we had budgeted $122 a linear foot. That was what was actually in the CIP for 22. The bid price was actually $142, which was a bit of a shocker. But because we'd cut scope out and we came in a little bit under budget, we were actually able to get the actual project cost down to an average price of $125 a linear foot. But nevertheless, that change from 22 to 25 in terms of the actual project cost, once all was said and done, was a 32% increase in 1 year. So that is, a little bit alarming, obviously. It's kind of indicative of the overall construction trends. The chart on the right there is just a chart I found online showing the construction cost trends from 2001 right through the end of 2022. So the 2023 hasn't been reflected in this chart yet, but we have seen prices really spiraling in construction particularly. A lot of that is driven by labor shortages, which I don't have a silver bullet for. Material prices, some materials are more affected than others, but I think the biggest cost driver overall is the labor shortages. So hopefully that answers all of the Councilor Lake's questions, and I would love an opportunity to take your questions.
One thing to clarify, if you could. So I saw the matrix of how you are determining. Is there a committee that does this, or?
So, like I said, once we went through the process with M.S.F.I. and we got buy-in on the rationale of weighting it with condition, but also looking at demand and how that was going to be, trying to prioritize sidewalks that had more likelihood of being needed and used by pedestrians. Once we did that, the actual scoring and ranking was basically an exercise with GIS. So our GIS technician upstairs, Will Schaffman, I have to give him a hat tip. He helped us a lot with this exercise. We took every segment in the map and we just drew a circle around it and said, how many of these demand drivers are within that circle? How many, do you touch a commercial zone? Is there a church within that circle? A lot of it was based on publicly available databases for things like healthcare facilities, the locations of those, and our own GIS database. I would love to say that it was just that easy, just ranking them and going right down the list. But there's also a little bit of art that goes into it. So for example, this summer we did a Lower Main Street was on the list, out by the cemetery, excuse me. That wasn't one of our top three, highest ranking, but we were planned and programmed to pave that section of Main Street. And it really made a lot of sense, while we had traffic screwed up on that busy corridor, to do the sidewalk at the same time. So we pulled that one forward to do that. So there's a little bit of art that goes into this as well. But that's kind of how the sausage gets made, if that answers your
But
question.
one thing that is not in it, and I think is really pretty good, very good, there's no politics in it. It's a numeric done by staff,
Yeah,
because it becomes very, very difficult for us as city councilors trying to represent our constituents. And, everyone thinks that, their situation is unique and more important. But a kind of specific question. So every year, is this reevaluated?
so every 2 years we update the CIP. Right now, in fact, the changes that I'm showing for '24 that we're suggesting were kind of developed out of the exercise. We're literally going through that this week, and in fact, it's all due to finance on the 6th of October. I'm probably not going to make the deadline, but we're going
I'm
to
sure
try.
you will.
But yeah, we're literally updating it right now, and there will be some changes as a result of cost increases and changes in the paving program as well that are going to make us want to shuffle things around a little bit.
So part of my question is, so if a particular situation is, let's say, number 5 on the list this year, and then it's reevaluated, it doesn't mean that it's moved up just because it's been on the list. It's the actual need. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's always going to be a reason why we move stuff. My preference wouldn't be to minimize the amount of reshuffling, because presumably people are looking at this list and they say, oh, I'm going to get a new sidewalk in 2 years, and I don't want to disappoint people doing a lot of changes if they're not necessary. So if we're making a change, there's a reason behind it, but that. I'm not sure if I answered your question or not. I'm
Yeah,
kind of spinning.
yeah. It's a blend.
I think the question is certainly condition doesn't get any better.
Well, that's absolutely true.
So any shufflement is related to other work that you have identified, whether it's water, sewer, road work, that would cause a shuffle.
Yeah, the ranking in terms of condition and demand generators are not going to change very much at all, right? The condition gets worse over time, and demand generators could conceivably change, but very little. There's not a lot of new hospitals going in. It's really the art part of the process where we're making it line up with other planned work in the city that will shift stuff around.
Gotcha. Committee questions? Yeah, Counselor.
Thank you for enlightening us and for all the work you do with the sidewalks. The new sidewalks on North Lincoln Street, while not in front of my house, are still quite lovely.
Glad to hear it.
I guess my question was with respect to the granite curbing, which we also put in when we put in sidewalks. Can you speak to, what proportion of cost are we looking at as a result of having that curbing as opposed to some other solution?
Sure. So, the underlying question is, yes, granite curbing is pretty costly. We don't use granite curbing, we don't install any curbing, just for the sake of aesthetics or, because it looks good. When we put in curbing, it's a decision that's made to address a specific need, usually related to drainage. So, where we have to control runoff, get it to a catch basin, where there's grade changes, either behind the sidewalk or in front of the sidewalk, that's where we would apply, curbing. City's standard, and that this has been city council policy for quite some time, is the granite. I will tell you that is a standard that I would pretty vocally endorse and support and recommend you continue. We've done work with precast concrete. We've done, obviously some bituminous curbing. They simply don't last and hold up to plowing the way granite does. Granite is very expensive, but it wears like iron.
Where's like granite? Yes, Counselor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to thank Counselor Lake for bringing this forward, and I guess my question for city staff is the streets, School Street and the other street we did not do, Winchester Street, and, well, all those streets, they went through the proper, that metric and formula in being chosen.
Yep.
Okay. Counselor Roberts, Filio, anything? Okay. Questions from the public at this point? Or Counselor Jones?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Philip Jones, City Councilor. One of the questions I wanted to ask, and Don, I think this goes back before your time. I think it was like 6 years ago, there was a policy, it was proposed by then Councilor Dave Richards, that with our infrastructure, we focus on the east side, the mindset being that if we start taking care of the infrastructure, the sidewalks and everything else on the east side of town, people will start respecting their properties more and start taking care of them. It was I just want to know, is that proposal, like when we do the CIP, is that still in the back of the minds of staff?
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
Corporal Lundquist, Assistant City Manager, Public Works Director, Emergency Management Director. It's going back a little more than 6 years, I'm going to say a decade, when there was those discussions on, and I actually was looking it up recently, where there was discussions on the question of where does the city do work within the city in general, east, central, west. If you look at the 2016 through, I think, 2018 CIP books, we had put all the projects that were in the different areas into the book. Not surprising, the east side of Keene has and will probably continue to have the majority of the projects, because the east side of Keene is also our oldest section of the city. And as Don talks about the conditions, where that is a heavily weighted factor, age and condition drive that. So I think, again, if you look at here, a lot of the work is on kind of the east side of Main Street. I think if you look at the amount of asphalt sidewalks, those are on the east side of Keene. So as you stay to those sort of priorities, that's going to continue to happen. No, we do not specifically at this point in time look specifically at is a certain amount of money going on the east side, north, south, west. We are driven, like I said, our infrastructure is driven by condition, and condition is really driven by age.
Yeah, Counselor.
Just to mention one other thing that's driving the condition of sidewalks on the east side, which is, that area has been subject to frequent flooding, and that does have a long-term effect on the infrastructure there, and that's one of the reasons why the condition of the sidewalks is so bad in that area, and one of the reasons it needs additional attention.
Counselor Richards was very much in the forefront of why replacing sidewalks with concrete and the curbs with granite is really important. And there was a lot of long-term analysis that was done. And in the long term, it actually does pay. And it looks better, it wears better, and financially it's a good thing. It is more expensive going in. Thinking of, is that $135 a lineal foot? Wow. But it is what it is. You do the analysis, I get it. So anything further from the public or council? Therefore, Counselor.
I move to recommend the update on the sidewalk asset management program be accepted as informational.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Anything further from the public or committee? Seeing none, all in favor? That is unanimous, and I thank you. Item number 2 is very much related. It's a sidewalk issue. There's a petition that was submitted regarding need for a sidewalk on Arch Street between Hurricane Road and Felt Road. Is there someone presenting that? Thank you. Come on forward, name and address, and thank you for coming this evening. And
Thank you, guys. This guy's very high up. Okay. Hi, my name is Rebecca Lancaster. I'm at 10 Wildwood Road in Keene. So, this letter is not only signed by myself, but also on behalf of a lot of other people in the community that I was able to, very easily reach out to. So we are, I wish I was in a spot that I was asking you tonight to come and fix our sidewalks because they're not in the best of condition. But unfortunately, we're not in that position because we don't have any. So what I did is put together, and I think you guys have it in front of you, the counselors, just a map. And I don't know if we could also go back in this PowerPoint. I don't want to mess up the PowerPoint, but all the way back, one of the first slides was showing just the sidewalks that we do have in Keene right now. And I think you'll notice in West Keene, and that's the area that, was it okay to touch that PowerPoint?
you lost me.
Oh, I wanted to know if we could just put back up on everyone's screens, like I think it was your second or third slide that just showed where we have all of our existing sidewalks in
Sure.
town. So I'm speaking to an area down, if you're driving down Arch Street with the high school on your right, very shortly after you finish passing the high school, there are no more sidewalks on Arch Street. Arch Street, thank you so much, is, really heavily traveled by our residents, but also from people coming in and out of Vermont all of the time, by high school students traveling from all over, the area, from all of our sending districts. And, you could see there that, in West Keene, we don't have too many sidewalks to begin with, but the fact that it ends right there where Hurricane meets Arch Street leaves a really big, a large population of our residents without the ability to really walk at all, including myself. I live on Wildwood, but the streets that I highlighted for you there are Wildwood, Felt Road, Blackberry, Red Fox Run, Partridge Berry, Arch Street itself, all the residents of Willowbrook, all the residents of Langdon Place. So this is over 250 separate residences, and conservatively, I would say, very conservatively, maybe 500 residents in Keene that really don't have the ability to just freely walk around their neighborhood. Arch Street in this area, the drainage is a really big issue, so if there's any water on the road, you really are walking, halfway into a lane if you're trying to walk down Arch Street. Felt itself, if you tried to walk around outside of the neighborhood going the other way, Felt where it meets Hurricane is an extraordinarily dangerous corner. People fly down Felt almost as fast as they do down Arch Street. I know you guys often have the little speed meters up there on Arch Street, just past Hurricane where we are, and speeds I would say are confidently, consistently in the 40s. People, driving, and a lot, again, of these drivers are teenagers from the high school in the mornings and the afternoons. So I have two little ones. We've been there 10 years now. I do not and will not let my kids walk. They can't walk around the neighborhood by themselves. We play in front of our house on the street. I have signs that I put up at both sides. That's the area that we've been able to play outside. But now they're at the point that, I have one of mine here now. They should be able to ride their bike to Simon School because it's a 10-minute bike ride, and they can't, and they won't be able to until there's a sidewalk there. We have a lot of elderly residents in this area who, I see walking all the time. I've seen countless times. I've been myself in this situation, but I've seen people really narrowly, miss being hit by cars. Again, predominantly, usually teenage drivers, and I hate to throw them under the bus, but they are right there, coming and going from the high school. It's a really, really significant safety issue, and I understand that we have there's a priority to make sure that the existing sidewalks are safe, but when we have this many residents that really don't have the ability to walk, it's a beautiful neighborhood, and we don't have the ability to walk there. Even when my little guys were little, I didn't feel comfortable pushing a stroller down that section, so I would put my kids in the car with the stroller, drive to another part of town, and walk around with the kids. And I don't think I'm alone in that sentiment. The residents of Langdon Place I constantly see walking on Arch Street or Whitcomb's Mill, which is even more dangerous, I think. Again, always, there's always fear in my heart because I'm worrying about them being hit by drivers that are just flying by. So, yeah, so, one afternoon, I kind of went around to neighbors. Couldn't find one person that was against putting adding on to the existing, the length of sidewalk that's on Arch Street. Maybe we could do it in sections, go down to like Wildwood, then Blackberry, then Whitcomb's Mill, and Felt Road. But I think this is, I'd like it to become a priority. And again, I know there's a lot of other residents, but I don't think there's any, again, when you look at this map of all of our existing sidewalks in Keene, that's, we represent a pretty large part geographically and just in numbers that don't have any sidewalks or any way to connect to what, just the rest of our neighborhoods. And I'd be happy to walk with any of you down any of those stretches of road at any time of the day to give you a really good idea of what it's like. So the invitation is standing. And I don't know.
Good presentation, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Question for Director Blomquist. Don was talking about sidewalk repair. This is new sidewalk. The
Yes, sir.
budget for a new sidewalk is another question to you, as well as the acquisition of the property to put the sidewalk on.
Sure, and maybe this is certainly an opportunity. On part of your agenda, there was a memorandum from my office talking about the new sidewalk program, and I had several counselors who had asked questions about, has the city had a new sidewalk program in the past, and whether, what happened to it, et cetera. So to start sort of with answering the question, anytime a new sidewalk goes in, depending on certainly the width of the road, a property acquisition could be required. Do not know, again, nothing has been done in this particular case to look at this particular property. When we have done new sidewalks, some we've been able to fit within the right-of-way, some we've had to do some strip acquisition to be able to provide enough space to have both space for grass belt and then a 5-foot sidewalk adjacent, because most of our sidewalks are sitting basically on the edge of the public right-of-way. So usually the back of the sidewalk is the end of the right-of-way. Just again, in your package and for the public, where there was a memorandum talking about a new sidewalk program. The city did have a new sidewalk program for about 20 years. That particular program was a combination of both sidewalks that have new sidewalk requirements that have been identified by staff, but also ones that came in through a petition process. Back in 2017, when the council was reviewing the 2018 to 2023 sidewalk program, the new sidewalk issues came up as a discussion point, because you had not been funding for at least 6+ years new sidewalks. You had been previously funding them at about $200,000 a year to accomplish that. At that particular time, the city had $4.4 or almost $4.5 million of new sidewalks identified. And at $200,000 a year, it was going to take 20 years to get through that list by itself. This was also a time frame the council was looking at your fiscal policies and looking at fiscal concerns. And the council did decide during that review in 2017 for that CIP that you would end the new sidewalk program. So when the CIP, you reviewed the CIP in 2019 and adopted that did not have the new sidewalk program in it. Just a little background on that particular program that time. You had a number of similar criterias for determining priorities and where new sidewalks would go. Similarly, we had a map product where we looked at, for example, school walking zones. We looked at, in this case, a half mile. That's the typical route distance at that time that the school district said anyone outside of a half mile, they bus. Within a half mile, people had to walk. That included private in both public and private schools. Was back to this idea of major community generators. Again, where were the parks? Where were the municipal centers, daycares, et cetera? Commercial clusters. We identified sort of where there were some major commercial clusters, like the Riverside Plaza, Coles Plaza, out in Park Avenue. There's a small commercial cluster there that has activities. And then we also identified at that point concentrations of housing developments. For example, you have out in West Keene, we have what's called Maple Acres. You have a number of other sort of denser clusters of residential. So that was one layer that was used to help sort of identify where new sidewalks should go. And then then you had a series of factors that you then used to prioritize within that list, sort of what should be looked at funded first, down through it. Again, pedestrian, again, factors looking at, again, based on generation and attractions, where would you have a high volume of pedestrians, medium and low? Vehicle traffic, again, was it an arterial, collector, or residential? It got different points for that. Was there already an existing sidewalk? Was there already existing sidewalk on one side? Was there a partial sidewalk? Did it go down only so far on a street? And lastly, there was no sidewalk at all. And then lastly, we looked at, okay, if a sidewalk was installed, would that increase the safety? So you had all those particular factors in. But I think the important aspect is to recognize is that the council did vote and adopt to take the new sidewalk program offline back in 2018.
Did you
I can answer any questions.
hear and understand? all
Oh, I
that?
heard it and I understood it.
I know,
I'm
it went,
happy to hear it.
went by really quick, but
Yeah, no, I got it. Yeah, I mean, so I guess I'm asking you to reconsider your entire policy then, because, I think it's a accessibility issue. The fact that the stretch of Arch Street is far less than a half mile from the high school. I met residents who live on Arch Street who had high schoolers who said, I don't let my high schoolers walk to school because even though it's, a quarter mile down the road, it's not safe for them to walk in the, and I think it's it's an ADA and a safety issue and a safe route to school issue. I mean, I can go on, but I already have. So I'll leave you with that, but I would hope then the council maybe doesn't reconsider it or call it maybe a new sidewalk program, but we take a look at this as an exception to the rule because again, I think it's a large amount of our population that just doesn't have any sidewalk access at all. And I don't think for this number of people, I don't think this is the case in town on a street as busy as, or as well-traveled as this bit of Arch Street is. So I don't know if you guys do you do like a Q&A now, or am I all set? Or?
well, I think regardless of what happens, you have raised the issue, and it's timely because as the budget is being put together, they're aware, and I don't expect that there's going to be a sidewalk out there immediately, but at least now it's in the process, and they will pay attention, and I would think give it good consideration anyway. Whether there's money or not, that's the other issue.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Quick question. With the new transportation bill, are any funds available or becoming available from the transportation bill for sidewalks?
Well, it's connected to some type of project connected to, you're talking about multimodal. So I guess the simple answer is there could be, but there has to be sort of a connection. A sidewalk by itself is not necessarily something that would score very high. With the scoring, you've heard us talk about some of the scoring criteria here, again, disadvantaged neighborhoods, things like that, those go into all those sort of scoring factors for that kind of money. But is it potentially? Again, I think the answer to the question is yes, but it's going to take some time. And that also goes back to I think as Councilor Greenwell identified, I think this is again, we're coming up on the CIP discussion. The council next February, March, will be discussing the 25 through 31. That's an opportunity to decide as a council if you want to get back into the new sidewalk construction business. And if you do, what would you like to see? Because like I said, right now, you had, again, 19 sidewalks identified when you stopped the program. Whether those 19 still have validity or not, I think would need to be evaluated. And then how does this request fit into those that still remain valid?
Well, we want to get back into it, we want you to find the money.
I kind of figured that. I will do the best that I can.
Thank you. Yeah, Counselor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to acknowledge that while we'll likely take this as informational for now, it is not, hasn't been said on deaf ears. We hear that. I personally, I'm employed at Langdon Place, so I travel Arch Street frequently for work, and that strip there's a big bend as well on the road. So there's also quite a blind spot when you're coming from our Park Ave down Arch Street at about, I want to say Wildwood. There's a bend there, and with the snow, that's another thing in the inclement weather. There's often, as you alluded to, with the drainage issues, when you add snowbanks to that, it really shortens the width of Arch Street, and you have residents and walkers that are nearly in the road with very poor lighting in that area as well. So all things that should be factored into those considerations. So I look forward to learning more about what we can do to reinstate that project. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, this is a public discussion. But I take committee first, and then I'll be to you. Yep, Councilor Roberts.
To me, it doesn't make any sense to say the reason we're doing away with this program is because it's costing too much. To me, you have the program to identify what needs to be done, and if we only have so much money that year, that's what gets done based on our priority list. Because if we don't have a program, you end up causing potentially a lot of problems, because you could say the group that comes in with the best lawyer and the best team gets a sidewalk, and then all of a sudden, people over here saying, wait a minute, what's wrong with my sidewalk? Because just this year, just on some of the housing areas that people wanted, they made sure that they came in with a really high-powered lawyer, a high-powered land, so they could afford doing that stuff. Some of these local areas in our city can't afford all that stuff. So to me is, we need the program back, we need to prioritize, and then the city council and the city manager needs to decide how much you're willing to spend on that year, to which we figured would benefit the city.
We will make that decision. Anything? Yes, sir. Name and address for the
Yeah,
minute.
hi, I'm Ken Bergman from 14 Blackberry Lane. I know a couple of you there and have talked with others. I won't add much to what Rebecca said in her very thorough presentation. And the counselor stole part of my thunder, because I was going to say that in the wintertime, when the snowbanks are there, then we have to walk in the road, which is very dangerous. And we often like to walk on the rail bed, which is not far away, but when it's rainy, we walk on the street, and then there's water puddles. You get splashed, or you have to walk through water to get through that area. And also, certain times of year, when the sunset coincides with the end of the workday, people going down West Street are blinded by the light. It's a very dangerous situation. You see them all with their visors down, their dark glasses on, going like this, and you hope they see you as you walk along the street. So we lived in Keene since '79 for 13 years on Paco Avenue, which I said was on the list. But our kids were at the far end. They had the longest walk to Jonathan Daniels School. It was the safest street we've ever been on. Arch Street is vastly more dangerous. Both of those kids who went to Jonathan Daniels went to Keene High School. So for 8 years, we had children going to Keene High School. Not once did they ever walk to the high school, because it is such a fearsome prospect to walk down Arch Street. And so this may or may not be politics, but I think it's the way in which you get information from the city to inform your choices. You have to consider in a balanced way the needs and the resources of the entire city. And I respect, your attempt to do this in a rational and well-reasoned way. But I just ask you to listen to what Rebecca has brought forward to you, and I would endorse her call for you to consider putting a sidewalk in West Keene where it is most needed, perhaps of all places in West Keene that don't have one now. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for your presentation. Anyone else like to speak to us on the sidewalk issue? Okay, well, I'm sure city staff has heard this, will consider it and be patient. It is a balance between what we need and what we can afford, and that's the hard work we do sometimes. Yes, Counselor.
Thanks. Yeah, just that I'm particularly concerned that this is a sidewalk near a street or near a school. And, you know, the major problem we're facing here is a lack of funding, and we need to figure out how we're going to fund a new sidewalk program, because there's a lot of new sidewalks that are needed. In this particular case, you know, I just wonder if there's a safe routes to school funding, you know, available for something like that.
Unfortunately, the Safe Routes to School program no longer exists. It was eliminated. It was consolidated with a number of other different programs, and that's what, again, is now coming out through the various, even the TAP program is not necessarily there anymore. It's through the various infrastructure spending. And again, those have very different criteria now for what you're looking to do, and again, they're typically looking at, again, a combination of things. Again, it doesn't say that none of these would fit that, it's just, there aren't those specific programs. Yes, the Safe Routes to School program was great, we did a number of projects, both in, for example, Maple Acres area, a number of them with that program, but again, the state and the federal level, they eliminated that particular program, that particular emphasis.
Yep. Mr. Redfern? Yes, please.
Chuck Redfern, 9 Colby Street. I wasn't going to address this matter, or I didn't come here tonight with the intention, but it seems to me that Councilor Filio said something that kind of jogged my memory, and that is that if you do apply some of these sidewalks as connector points to the trails, then you can use the reason that you need this sidewalk is to connect to an existing trail. And the city's been very good at doing that. It's called connector points. And that would help your ranking as far as, you know, grant-wise goes. The other thing is we have an advisory committee. It's the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee. And they may be willing, well, they will, if you request, for them to look at this and address this and see if there is a grant available. And so all you'd have to do is request that from them. It's a little different than their more narrow mission, and that is to look at the multi-use trails. However, this is a pedestrian safety issue, and I'm sure that with the request coming from this committee or from City Council, something could be done in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you. See you again soon. Okay, anything further on this issue? Oh, yep, fine, come back.
I just wanted to know when you need to see me again, so we just don't forget about this. Is it like
I mean,
a little later in budget time, or?
Well, my suggestion is, I said, typically, if you keep track of the city's capital improvement program, that process begins in January of this year. So the first or second Thursday in January, they will be placing that proposed program on the council's desk. They will then begin the review. There will be typically then in February, there will be several finance committee meetings, and then I think the first council meeting in March is when the public hearing is on this. So that would be an opportunity to certainly come in and provide council feedback on everything that we've talked about tonight.
So the March
The March.
meeting? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And I definitely want to thank you for bringing this to our attention, Councilor Lake for being attentive to his constituents and the issue. A motion, please.
That said, I'm just going to add one little piece, and just that I think we've got some good ideas and discussion today, so I think we're going to definitely be moving this forward behind the scenes for continued dialogue. And with that, I move to recommend the petition for the Arch Street neighborhood as well as the background information be accepted as informational.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Anything further from the committee or public? Seeing none, all in favor? Unanimous. Thank you. Item number 3, which is probably why most of you folks are here. This is regarding the Lower Winchester Street project. The steering committee has met, and there's a presentation, a PowerPoint presentation, that our city engineer and consultants are going to present.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Don Lucier, city engineer. And if you'll indulge me for just a second here, I need to find the right presentation.
And as you're doing that, I just want to tell you that I want to assure everyone this will be a lot more efficient program than what went on with the Main Street program. So this is not going to be a 2-year discussion.
We certainly hope so. But that said, we do have a lot to talk about, so let's jump right into it. We're here tonight, obviously, about the Lower Winchester Street, what we're calling the Lower Winchester Street Reconstruction Project. Oh, excuse me. With me tonight is Gene McCarthy from McFarland Johnson. He's the design consultant for the project. So we're talking about Lower Winchester Street. And that project, just to let you know what to expect here, I'm going to give you a little overview, talk about the process kind of stuff, the things that we have to jump through, the hoops that we have to jump through for the federal funds that we're using. Gene, I'm going to let talk about all of the really boring engineering stuff that we've got to get through. And then at the end, I'll kind of summarize with the recommendations and the path forward for the project. The project is intended to run from the south side of the Route 101 roundabout all the way to the Swansea-Keene town line and actually up to the Market Basket intersection. The Market Basket, or the Swansea section, was added into the project at the request of Southwest Regional Planning and the town of Swansea. So we have an agreement with them we're managing the project and they're paying their share of the costs associated with it. So the project, as you can see there, that's the total footprint, but it also includes the Ash Swamp Brook the Winchester Street Bridge over Ash Swamp Brook will be an important component. That project was started back in 2017, but the funding that was available at that time wasn't sufficient. So DOT punted it and married it up with its project so that they could have enough funding to cover the cost of the bridge. All right, so in terms of process, this is going through what's called the Local Public Agency Process, LPA for short. That is basically it's the recipe book that DOT prescribes that we follow when we're spending federal funds as a subrecipient to a grant. And that's the program we're in. These are 80% of the project costs will be funded by the federal government, but it's money that's funded through the DOT and we're the subrecipients. So that process includes a number of particular steps that we have to follow. Big part of that is the public engagement, public outreach process. Now, part of the way we addressed that was through a steering committee. About a year ago, the mayor appointed a steering committee for its project. It consisted of 7 members, 5 from Keene and 2 from Swansea representatives. And it was heavily weighted towards the business community representatives through this corridor. And I'll talk more about who those were in a second. That steering committee held a number of different public meetings, 2 of which were listening sessions that were intended not for us to give out information, but really just to ask questions of the public and ask them what they thought were the key problems and challenges along with the opportunities. We had 2 of those. One was held in Swansea, one was held here in Keene. And then we have to develop a purpose and need statement. I think I mentioned last week that this is a pretty critical piece of paper. It really defines the metrics by which the project outcomes will be judged. And then Gene has to go through a whole bunch of work in terms of identifying natural and cultural resources, measuring traffic, and doing a lot of the engineering stuff in order to come up with a engineeringly defensible project. We're at the point now at the end of that where the public body that's responsible for the project, the project sponsor, in this case it's both the town selectmen in Swansea and the Keene City Council, has to choose a proposed action. And that is what we're proposing to the federal government and DOT to build with these funds. So at the end of this process, and we might not get through it tonight, I understand, but we're gonna be looking for this committee to make a recommendation to the full city council and the full city council to adopt a proposed action for the corridor. And we'll talk more about what the steering committee recommended that at the end of the night. All right, so I wanted to kind of just give a little bit of a tip of the hat to the folks that served on the steering committee. From Swansea, Sarah Bollinger. I'm sorry, Sarah, I'm going to mispronounce your name again. She actually served as our vice chair. Trevor Bonet was a representative of the business community. He's one of the co-owners for Branch and Blade. Mr. Fish is a resident on, is he on Fairbanks or Wetmore? I think Wetmore. But he was a residential representative on the committee. Mr. Hamshaw, owner of Hamshaw Lumber, was obviously, he was the chair of the committee and a business representative. Mr. Lamp was a representative from selected by the town of Swansea. His connection to the project is he's actually an engineer who has done a lot of work for Market Basket. So I think that was the reason they wanted his perspective on the committee. Mr. McCauley is from Fairfield's automotive dealership. He was here earlier tonight. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to stay past 7, so he offers his apologies, and he is looking forward to providing comment probably at the next meeting. And then finally, Mr. Tempesta of Jimmy Tempesta's fame, runs the restaurant there on Kit Street. So as I said, it's a pretty heavy skew towards the business community for the project. Oh, Asa, what happened? Thank you. Oh, not thank you.
Ready for a motion?
That's happened a few times. I don't think it's you.
Wait for it. So how have you been? All right, I'm going to ask for a quick recess. Oh, wait, here we go. Wait, half?
It's on the back.
One of the televisions isn't working. Yeah, right over here. The audience does seem like they're working. All right, well, that's just for court then. He doesn't need to see it. There we go. Okay, so that's the steering committee. And now I'm going to turn it over to Mr. McCarthy to get into the details.
Slide that over just so I can. Great. Thanks, Don. So as Don said, one of the first things that we did from a public perspective is had these 2 listening sessions. And we put the slide up here to show these are the 2 simple questions that we asked of the attendees. We had breakout groups, asked them in a group setting, sitting around a table, just tell us what they thought were the problems and challenges that they see on this corridor as users, as residents, as business owners. And so it's a real kind of charrette type of a situation so that people can really speak their minds. And then we had at the end, after everyone had a report, then we kind of just had a group discussion and listed all of the problems and issues that they felt existed on the corridor. But we also asked the question about opportunities, not only what are the problems that we'd like to solve, but what are the things that they would like to see on the corridor, as a result of the project. Now, as Don said, that we use this information to develop the purpose and need statement for the project. And this really becomes the cornerstone for what we do on the engineering side to say, what are those things that need to be addressed by this project? And these are really the highlights that came of that whole discussion. And a lot of them have to do with a lot of the things that you would expect to see on a transportation corridor, which have to do with congestion, safety. But one of the things that really jumped out at us on this corridor was the turns, the left turns. It's a 2-lane road, there's a lot of development, there's a lot of driveways, side roads, and the access to and from the corridor from the land uses really jumped out as a problem that people saw using the corridor. Interestingly enough, a lot of pedestrian issues. We lost the screen again, I'm afraid. I can see it. Actually, it's okay in the back. They can hear us, right? We did lose the screens up for the council. All right. All right, we'll try to keep it as going as quick as we can. So again, there you go. So pedestrian facilities were certainly mentioned for this corridor, both from sidewalks, crossings, and that kind of situation, bicycle accommodation. Then you also had things about congestion, speed, mentioned the bridge, which everyone has an issue with. So those were the real problems that arose during those two sessions. And then from the opportunity perspective, it was sort of the reverse. Try to improve safety, improve the intersection operations, traffic calming, trying to slow down traffic that goes through this. It's a busy corridor, so there's a lot of activity. So adding sidewalks, bike lanes, things of that nature. The term roundabouts came up. People talk about aesthetics. These are the kind of those opportunities that they see, hey, let's try to see from what this project can provide as it moves forward. So from these two lists that we generated, we developed this purpose statement. And the purpose statement talks about a lot of the things that we heard, which the term complete street was brought up. It's a policy within the city. The congestion and what they called it the side street queuing, which is, again, those issues from accessing this corridor from the side street, especially if you're trying to make a left turn during some of those busy periods, how difficult that can be. But also things like improving aesthetics and safety. So safety obviously is always a prime consideration in any of these projects. And then the last sentence is really to deal with the bridge. I mean, I know there's a lot of issues with that bridge right now. It's in rough shape, and that bridge will be replaced as part of this project. Then there's the need statement. That this talks about the real specifics that really come out of the need to do this project. And the number one was that high volume of turning traffic. A lot of uses on this corridor, and it just seems that so much of the delay and certainly some of the safety issues that are out there are people trying to get on and off the corridor from these side streets. And again, delays are an issue. Certainly the pedestrian bicycle. We heard a lot about speed. That this is Route 10. There's a lot of people trying to get through the corridor to access Route 101. So that certainly became one of those issues, and then again, the bridge. So the first thing we did from an engineering perspective was to look at the traffic. So we actually had a very robust traffic counting program. So last October, we went out there and counted traffic at many different locations. So we counted 12 different intersections. And those are what we call peak hour counts, where we're looking at the morning, the afternoon, but also the Saturday peaks to make sure that we see the worst of the traffic at those intersections. We also did 24-hour counts. Those are the ones where we put the tube in the road, we counted for several days, so we got a real sense of what times of the day you saw a lot of traffic. And we did one count also on Matthews Road, because that is another kind of road that provide some regional traffic. So now I'll have some slides that show the rest of this, but we use the counts to develop what is the current condition of traffic on the corridor. Then we look at the future, and that's one of the bigger pieces of this study, is to say, what is the future of the corridor in terms of traffic? So we need to project the traffic out, and we typically do a 20-year horizon, where we want to make sure that this, whatever we're proposing, will function well for that 20-year period. So we project traffic to a future year, which I'll describe that in more detail. And for this project, we've established the year 2045 is our design year. Now, when we do that, we are then projecting that there will be an increase of traffic on Winchester Street anywhere from 20 to 30%. And I'll show you in a little more detail where that occurs. And then all of the analyses that we do from a traffic perspective are using those 2045 volumes. And again, that is so that we make sure that whatever is proposed will function well into the future. So this is a graphic. Don't worry, you're not trying to read what the volumes are, but this is sort of the graphic that we put together that shows the specifics at each intersection, how much traffic is going through the intersection, how many right turns there are, how many left turns. We also counted pedestrians and bicycles, so we know exactly what's going on within the corridor. So this one, we kind of highlighted a couple key locations. So we looked at the actual traffic on Winchester Street at 2 locations. And these are the peaks. So the first one is just north of Criff, and you'll see in the morning, there's the peak is about 857 vehicles. That's vehicles per hour. So that's in the peak hour, that's the highest volume of traffic in that hour. But for the southbound, it's in the afternoon. And you also notice that the afternoon peak is quite a bit higher than the morning peak. Usually you kind of see those more balanced, but the southbound traffic in this corridor certainly is a much heavier volume than the northbound. You know, and it's just the nature of the way that the traffic is in this location. The other segment that we highlighted was just south of Matthews, kind of approaching the boundary with Swansea. And you still have that peak for the southbound in the afternoon and the northbound in the morning. But there's about a 200 vehicle decline as you go to the south. And I'll explain that a little bit as I move forward. So this is the existing situation. So this is for 2023. These are the volumes for the peak period that we're using from a design perspective. So then, sorry. Boy, what did I do? Sorry, okay. So, once we start to look at the projections, we look at it from a regional perspective, and we also look at it from the perspective of what's happening within this corridor. So along Route 10, Winchester Street, and West Swansea Road, we've applied a 1% per year growth factor. And that percentage is based on regional trends. This is in consultation with the DOT. And this is a very common number that is being used in New Hampshire at this time, that's the planning level, what we are expecting growth in the area. Now, for the side roads, we actually look at them individually. And for some of the more minor roads or roads that have already been more developed, we have a much more modest percentage. So for Kit, for instance, we only showed 0.25% per year because that roadway is pretty much developed. All the other side roads, we've done the same. You can see there we said 0.25%. A much more modest growth. We're not really expecting a huge increase in traffic from some of the side roads. Mostly residential, we don't see that. But then at Bradco and at Matthews, those 2 streets, we also had that 1% growth. And again, just the expectation is you're gonna see more growth from those 2 locations. Now, the one that we looked at in a very specific manner is Criff. Criff has a much more undeveloped land today than any other location within the corridor. So we worked with the city, we worked with the city planning department, the code enforcement to say, okay, of the land that's there, what kind of development potential is there? And we came up with that area, looked at the type of development, and actually did a trip generation for that potential growth and applied that to Criff as it then would access Winchester Street. So that was a very unique dynamic for that location, and it did drive more traffic than a lot of the other side roads, just because the expectation is there in the future there could be more growth coming from Criff than some of the other roads. So when we apply all those factors to those volumes from 2023, we come up with this change. So we highlighted those same locations, and the numbers that really jump out at you are for those southbound, that PM peak that was coming north of Criff went from 1,062 up to 1,516 vehicles. And then for the area south of Matthews, it jumped a similar amount from 878 up to 1,126. So for the northbound traffic, something very interesting happened. That growth that we talked about from Criff actually shifted the peak. So currently, the peak in the northbound is the morning, but because of that anticipated development at Criff, that northbound shifted to the afternoon. So the expectation is that in the future, the afternoon will be the peak for both the northbound and southbound segments of Winchester Street. And the growth, again, from like the 1,062 and about the 857, now you're in that 1,200 and 1,500 vehicles. That sort of puts us into another level of demand, and we're trying to address the capacity. And as we move forward into the alternatives development, you'll see that the Criff Road development is driving some of what we're proposing today.
Question for you.
Yes?
All of your numbers are based on a Saturday?
No. These are.
What's SAT?
Oh, that is Saturday. So in the graphic, there's actually three values. If you look at the details, there's an AM weekday, there's a PM weekday, and then there's a Saturday midday. So we've counted for every single one of those. The ones that I've highlighted, those are the weekday morning and afternoon peaks. We counted Saturday, but in this particular case, the weekdays had the higher volumes, not the Saturday.
Yeah.
And that was different on the other side of Winchester Street. We had some of those peaks were the Saturday peaks. So it was the reason we counted was because of what had happened on other segments of Winchester Street.
Thanks.
Okay. So I want to get into the alternatives development now. So we're looking at the corridor as well as the intersections. So there are some key intersections that are circled there. So we have the Criff Road, the Matthews Road, and then the existing signalized intersection for the Market Basket. But one of the intersections really jumped out at us as we started looking at it from a capacity and a safety perspective, and that's the Kit Street access. Anyone who comes off of the roundabout now heading south on Winchester Street knows that Kit intersection is very close to the roundabout. And access to and from that can be quite difficult. And through the process, not only from the listening session, working with the steering committee, we hear that during those peaks, if you're trying to come out of Kit Road and you're trying to make that left turn, it's very difficult to do. There's just so much traffic coming southbound from the roundabout, going northbound, trying to find that gap to make that left turn can be very difficult. And then it becomes a safety issue where people are starting to make that movement when they probably shouldn't be, and something we don't want. So one of the established kind of geometric decisions that was made, I think, between all of us working on the team is that left turn really cannot continue with the traffic, with the growth, so that all of the concepts that we developed for this location eliminated that left turn, and that was going to become a right in and a right out. And that red line that kind of shows down the median that would be a raised island, raised median that would prohibit that left turn coming out of Kit Street. And that became sort of a basis for the evaluation. So as we started looking therefore at the other intersection, realizing that you had traffic that was coming out of Kit Street and they would have to make a U-turn at some place along the corridor, that started driving the discussion about what is the appropriate intersection configurations at Criff, at Matthews, and so forth. Because what this graphic is showing that if we shut off the left turns, the next opportunity for people to make a U-turn to head north would be at Criff Road. We know currently there are people who do come out, make a right turn, and they go down the corridor and they turn left into businesses to try to reverse direction to go northbound. We're trying to make this a more designed, dynamic, and so that we could provide a place for them to make that turnaround. So this is a graphic that shows if we were to put a signal at Criff Road, which is warranted with the new volume, if you're trying to accommodate a truck making a left turn, that we'd have to do an intersection like what is shown there. We'd have to provide a little slip lane so that a truck could actually make that turn. That became something that wasn't advantageous. So as I go through the rest of the analyses, you're gonna see that at the key intersections that we're showing roundabouts. And it really is because in order to really provide that type of a dynamic, the roundabouts really were working better than the signals as you see there laid out. So all the graphics you'll see from now on, you'll see the roundabouts that have been laid out for those intersections. So as we started looking at this corridor, it became obvious that there were different contexts, different areas that were unique. So we actually broke up the corridor into these three different segments. So we have a north segment that starts at the existing roundabout at 101 and heads south, just south of Criff. So it includes the Criff intersection all the way up to the existing roundabout. We have the middle section, which goes south and includes the intersection of Bradco and Matthews, and then the south segment, which is that last piece in Keene and includes the segment within Swansea. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you each segment, the different sections, the cross sections that we considered, and then what those look like in plan view, and then what was eventually came out of the steering committee as a recommendation. So for the north segment, as you most know right now, that segment actually has 3 lanes. There's a lane in each direction, one northbound, one southbound, and then it has that center turn lane currently. Both of the proposed sections that we evaluated increased the lanes. And that, again, is that demand from Criff is showing that we need additional capacity within this segment. So from Criff Road up to the existing roundabout, you'd have 2 lanes in each direction. Then the difference in these 2 sections is the one on the left would provide that center turn lane like what's out there today. The other one would actually have a raised divided island, and I'll explain that a little bit as we move forward. Now, what is also shown on these proposed sections is, one, we're proposing standard shoulder bike lanes, 5 foot wide on each direction, adjacent to a new curb. and we're showing a sidewalk. The sidewalk is only on the west side, so it's only gonna be one sidewalk along that side of Winchester Street. And you can see the person kind of walking on the left side. Not sure if this will show, it doesn't show up on the screen, sorry. So you can see there that we have the person walking on the sidewalk on the left side of the image, but there isn't one on the right side. So the proposal is to have the sidewalk on one side only. So if you take each of those proposed cross-sections and apply it to the plan view, so this is that north segment shows what we call a hybrid roundabout at Criff Road with the 4 lanes and the median. So that median then runs from Criff Road all the way along Winchester Street to the existing roundabout. And one thing I should mention about the sections is the 2 sections are the same width. The only difference is how we handle the median. And the median would be the turn lane or the raised island of this is the same width. So the out-to-out width is identical for both of these options. So if we look at the roundabouts that with the 5-lane, you can see that we did carry that island past Kit, because that's what we said we would do for all of them. But then from there to the roundabout, you'd have that center turn lane if people wanted to access throughout there. So during the meeting with the steering committee, their recommendation for this segment was the divided 4-lane road with that raised median, with the roundabout at Criff. So in this case, you would only there would be no left turns from Winchester Street, that you would use the roundabouts if you wanted to reverse direction. So that was for the north segment. So for the middle segment, the current condition is there's a single lane in each direction, that's it, so the 2 lanes. And the 2 segments, again, same footprint. So in one case, we would be proposing the addition of a center turn lane. That's the one on the left side. The one on the right side would be the same median separated with the single lane in each direction. The thing that's different about this is that we're not proposing additional capacity. That even with the increase in traffic, we don't need the extra lane south of Criff. It's just north of Criff that the demand is driving that additional capacity. We still have the shoulder bike lanes, and we still have the sidewalk along that, the west side of the corridor. So if you look at the first one with the 3 lanes, again, this shows the roundabout that would be placed at Matthews, the roundabout at Criff, and this would just be a 2-lane with the same situation, no left turns. Same footprint, but if you were to allow the center turn lanes, the center would allow that left turns in both directions. So again, when this was brought to the steering committee, for this segment, they again preferred having the median, no left turns, using the roundabouts to turn direction. The dynamic that currently exists at Bradco, that's Bradco there, just to the right of Matthews. We know there's a lot of development and there's a lot of business up on Bradco. That left turn has caused a lot of issue. That afternoon, a lot of people coming out of Bradco trying to make that left turn. It's a very difficult turn. What we did is added an additional lane southbound there. So if you came out of Bradco, you'd make your right turn, you'd go to this roundabout at Matthews, and you'd be able to turn around and head north. So again, the no left turns will really address that issue that currently exists at Bradco. So the south segment, again, the existing corridor, it's narrower as we get in this area. The context changes quite a bit. There's residential homes along this segment. within Keene, as you get into Swansea, you get in front of some of the apartment complexes and the Market Basket. Again, the two segments here are quite different. One was just essentially to retain the 2 lanes, still provide the shoulder and the bike lanes, and also continue the sidewalk, but still have a fairly narrow corridor in this segment. The other option was to actually add that center turn lane in this direction, in this area too, to provide some of those homes with the ability to get into that left turn lane. Again, when you look at these, the plan views are a little bit different because the 3-lane section actually is wider because it has that additional capacity, certainly more impacts. And we did this originally with the signal, retaining the signal at the Market Basket entrance. The 2-lane one really it's narrower. Everything else would function the same. They just wouldn't have that center turn lane for those left turn pockets. So it was not clear during the listening sessions, and it wasn't clear from even within the steering committee how the people in this area might feel about the roundabout, about having a center turn lane. Really, are there issues, are the issues with turning traffic as significant there as some others? So Don had a good idea, very good idea, to actually conduct a survey.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So he actually put together a survey, sent it out to the neighborhoods that, essentially everything that you see on this image was sent out to all those residents. We got some really good responses. I think you got 24 responses from those people, and that really helped us understand what they felt were the issues and how comfortable they were with some of the solutions. So the results of this, and I'm gonna have to put my glasses on for this, is from a neighborhood perspective. Now this was there were 3 different questions that were asked. The blue was speed. Is this an issue? And there was nobody that said it was no problem, nobody that said it was a number 2, but it was a big problem for many, many, many people felt that the speed was an issue in this segment of the corridor. The orange bar was congestion, and you can see still a bigger problem, not as much as speed, but still they felt it was an issue. And then I don't even know what
Left
color it
turns.
is. The left turns,
Gray.
the one on that gray color, again, pretty high, responses that is a problem, that the left turns is a problem for them in that neighborhood. What is the most urgent problem? And you can see that safety and speed were pretty neck and neck. Congestion and, I don't know what other was, but.
Other was like a free form, and we got a lot of different responses for
Okay,
that one.
right. But you can see speed and safety obviously kind of went hand in hand, and certainly a concern for the residents in this area. And then this had to do with a couple of different potential solutions. The center turn lane option was high response in favor. Widening the road, they felt comfortable with that. And then what the left turn restriction was, that was referring to whether you would only have the no left turns and with a median, and they weren't very much in favor of
I
that.
weren't in love with that.
They didn't
And
like that.
I want to believe it's because I worded the question poorly. What I should have said is, would you be in favor of left turn restrictions if there was a roundabout nearby to turn around? But we didn't say that, so.
Was unsure.
Yeah.
So in the end, the solution came down to the 3-lane section. People saw safety and the left turns were an issue, so the recommendation was to put the 3-lane section for this segment of the project. And sort of late in the game, this came from some of the steering committee discussions, was would they consider a roundabout at the Market Basket intersection? Actually, Don went to the DOT and asked them if it's something that we could consider, which they agreed to. We studied it, and in the end, it was part of the recommendation from the steering committee was to consider the roundabout solution at Market Basket rather than the current signal.
And I should say that's a question that
Right.
the Swansea Select Board is considering right now. You know, if they decide to move forward with that, they're gonna have to pay 20% of the cost of building a roundabout. So that's not something that we have to think about, but it's what was the recommendation from the steering committee.
Right. Want to get into a little bit about the pedestrian accommodation. I kind of highlighted this as I was going through the segments, how throughout the corridor, we've kept the sidewalk on that west side throughout, so it would connect to the sidewalks at the existing roundabout, extend all the way along the corridor to the Market Basket intersection. So I want to just kind of go through this. We highlighted where it would be for the corridor. In the case of the roundabouts, the sidewalks would go all the way around the roundabouts. And for the roundabouts, much like you see on the two under construction now, those are wider because they're actually multi-use paths, so that if you're a cyclist and you're riding along and you don't feel comfortable riding through a roundabout, there'll be a ramp that can take you up and you can actually ride around it'll be a multi-use path because it will be wider. So that's why you see the shading around the roundabout. Similarly, as you go to the middle section, that sidewalk will be carried across the bridge that'll go over the brook. You'll have the same multi-use path around the roundabout at Matthews. The one change here, as we got to the south piece, it was clear there were more land uses on the east side for Lucinda. There's some apartment complexes there. So for that, it's mostly, again, in Swansea, but we are going to carry the sidewalk on both sides to serve all of those uses and all those homes that are there. So that sidewalk would be carried up to Lucinda. And that's the only segment that we're really carrying the sidewalk along the corridor. And I think with that, you're going to take over and talk about the
So
overall.
what Gene presented was the recommendations that came out of the steering committee process. I would love to say that those were all unanimous recommendations of the committee. Unfortunately, you know, as they were debating and discussing the different alternatives, it came pretty clear that we probably weren't going to get to a unanimous decision on these options. So we broke it down into a number of smaller sort of elements, and we asked the steering committee to vote on each of those elements individually. So the way that's broke down, we asked them about adding capacity to travel lanes on the north segment. You know, as Gene presented, you know, the expected volumes go up to 1,500 cars in an hour in the future. We really suggest that we need to add an extra lane in each direction to handle that. The steering committee agreed with that recommendation by a vote of 3-2. When it comes to the center of the corridor, for the northern segment, the committee voted 4-1 in favor of a raised median in lieu of center turn lane. In the middle section between Criff and Matthews, they voted 3-2 for a raised median. Again, there was, you know, different opinions and different perspectives depending on, you know, the business interests and individual concerns. The roundabouts, I will say, got a little bit more support. They were 4-1 in favor of roundabouts for the corridor instead of signalized intersections. And then finally, they really basically deferred to the residents that we polled in terms of the southern leg of the project. So they voted for a shared use turn lane between Matthews and Market Basket by 5-0. So that one was unanimous. Woo-hoo. So, you know, and I know Mr. Hamshaw is here tonight. I hope that he, you know, expresses. No, he's right there. Mr. McCauley from Fairfields was here earlier, and I know, you know, he was one of the ones that was concerned about restricting left turns in and out of his business, which, you know, is understandable. Gene mentioned earlier that the number one thing that we heard during the listening sessions was left turns in and out. The best fix from that, from an engineering perspective, is a raised median that restricts that movement. The raised median and roundabouts go together like peanut butter and jelly. They're just made to work together. So I think the recommendations that are presented are a very good option. I can certainly support it, but it's not a unanimous support, and not everybody in the community is going to love this option. So. Now, before we wrap up, I do want to talk about property impacts. I mentioned a couple weeks ago, we're kind of lucky in that the DOT, because this is a state highway and they own the corridor, they are going to be managing all of the right-of-way acquisitions, and they're going to be pretty extensive. There are a total of 50 parcels along this project that we're going to be touching in one way or another. The majority of those are going to be temporary only. You know, as we're constructing a sidewalk right up against the property line, we're going to naturally need to grade and smooth out the lawn and whatnot. For those properties, we need temporary easements. Another 18 or so are going to be limited strip acquisitions, meaning we might need a foot or 3 feet along the front of a property in order to squeeze everything in. Only 2 of the properties really had pretty substantially sized acquisitions where, and those were both at the roundabout, where we need more land to put the roundabout in. There is a potential that we may need additional room to address stormwater management. You know, as part of the project, we have to address how we're managing stormwater in keeping with the city's standards. We haven't figured out where that stormwater treatment is going to go yet, so there is potential that there'll be additional impacts there. I should mention, and this affects Fairfield specifically, right now, the land in front of Fairfields where you see a lot of cars on display is actually city-owned land. We have given them an easement to use it until such time as it's needed for the widening of Winchester Street. But that is our land, and that easement to use it will be basically rescinded once we need it for this project. So that is certainly an impact on that property, although it's not an actual taking. It's land that we already have. And then finally, I mentioned there that, like I said, the right-of-way is being managed by the DOT. All right, so where do we go from here? Like I mentioned earlier, eventually what we need from the city council is a selection of a proposed alternative. We showed you what elements the steering committee selected and recommended, but you can choose any combination of the alternatives that we've shown you, or maybe you want us to come back and look at others. But eventually, we're hoping by December, the city council will get through that process and select a proposed action. That'll allow Gene and his team to finish up what's called the engineering study report. Basically, it bundles all of its information together, gives it to Federal Highway, and says, here, this is what we want to build. They take a month or 2 to review that and give us their comments back, and then really it's pretty much up to Gene and his team then to take that much further into the detailed design process. That process, and there's a couple of iterations along the way where we give it back to DOT for review and comment, and it's kind of an iterative step. That process, along with the right-of-way acquisition, will take us through the winter of '26. In other words, December 2025, January 2026, that timeframe is what we're expecting. And right now, we're expecting to begin construction in the summer of '26. And that is enough of that.
Are you sure?
I would love to take your questions.
Committee questions at this point? Yeah, Counselor.
On Monday night, we heard from the New Hampshire DOT that there was a project going on in Swansea along that road, I believe. Is that directly south of that?
No, so, yes, I'm sorry, I was thinking of a different thing. Yeah, so they're doing sidewalk improvements and corridor improvements on Winchester Street. The timing of that one, I believe it's in 31, so it's a little further out.
31, wow.
The state 10-year plan right now that's being reviewed covers from 2025 to 2031, is that right? No. No, 2034, yeah.
I hope we're all there for the ribbon cutting.
From your lips.
I am particularly interested in hearing from the affected abutters myself. But other questions for consultant and the engineer? Okay, everyone's happy so far.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, definitely, public input is welcome, and show of hands, anyone? Come on up, name and address for the minute taker.
Sure. Steve Silverstein and 3 Criff Court, which is, we're in a butter off of Criff Road. So I just thought the whole process sounded great. The roundabout seemed like a great idea. It is a real problem for side road backup for UPS trucks and things like that on Criff Road.
Yeah.
So, and getting everybody to turn right and go around the circle, and then it'll be disruptive, and it seems a little odd to have so many roundabouts all stacked in a row on that road, but I think I'm just fully in support. Just
Very
myself.
good, thank you. Can I call out the chair of the committee to make comment, perhaps? Doug Hamshaw, Hampshire Lumber.
This project actually predates all of the people currently involved with it. It went back 10 years before the current project got underway, and at that time, I approached the city about the extreme amount of traffic in front of our entrance to Bradco, and they graciously did a car count, and they said there's certainly no budget for a traffic light there or other solutions that we looked at. When they came back from their study, they said not only is this a urgent project, but we've already classified it as a failed intersection. That was, I don't know, 15 years ago. And the problems have only gotten worse. What they didn't explain, and they did a very good job of looking at wait times for every left turn along that corridor. And wait times during the rush hours were pretty amazing. It was, at Bradco Street, it was 7 minutes average wait time. That's a long time if you sit there for 7 minutes. And there were equally bad times, certainly by Tempestas, a real problem. Basically, everyone from Tempestas gave up turning left and turned right. And all of those people end up turning around in businesses and sometimes unsafe situations. They'll drive into the south exit of Fairfields and come out the north exit of Fairfields, all sorts of problems. At Hampshire Lumber, we had a steady stream of traffic going through our parking lot. So we eventually set up stanchions to block that access during rush hour. So it's a safety and huge inconvenience factor. The wait times using the roundabouts at Hampshire Lumber, they're estimating 45 seconds using the roundabout. Now, it's inconvenient to go down to a roundabout and turn around, but when your wait time is 45 seconds, it's a lot better than sitting there for 7 minutes. Traffic approaching from the south, and this is definitely a problem, and all of the business owners here were looking at the problems involved and looking at the possible solutions, and there is no easy answer, but coming from the south to Hampshire Lumber, you have to go past the lumberyard up to Criff Road, get on a roundabout and come back. Initially, that will absolutely cause a loss of business, as will, you know, how it's impacting each business along the way will have different impacts, but they're all going to suffer from this. They're going to suffer from the construction phase of it, obviously. So it's a huge impact that we're looking at from the businesses along that road. Fairfields is perhaps looking at one of the worst impacts. And, you know, he expressed all those things, and we certainly didn't disagree with him. That doesn't mean we came to a unanimous solution, but there was nobody involved in that steering project process who didn't recognize all the problems, understand them all, and try to come up with a recommendation. I do know that left-hand turns out of Bradco, which is one of the worst spots. If it gets any worse, we already have customers telling us that they just don't want to do it, and they don't come to our store during the period from 4 to 5:30. And I don't know if that coincides exactly with the study's time frame, and it is only the evening traffic at the current time that is terrible. According to the study, you see now it's gonna turn into an AM problem also. Currently, during the AM, the cars tend to come at different times from different places, and it breaks it up a little. But that's not gonna happen in the future when you get more traffic. So, like it or not, this corridor has to be dealt with. Certainly, you know, the recommendation we came to was not easy. We had lots of meetings, we had lots of discussion, and, you know, the best we could come up with was a fairly unanimous recommendation. But the project has to happen. That the bridge over the Ash Brook is beyond bad. And there's other spots that are beyond bad. Speaking about pedestrian safety, which you heard earlier tonight, the pedestrian safety along there is unbelievable. If you walk, and most people do walk on the west side, for whatever reason, they all seem to gravitate to walking on the west side. If you go over that bridge as a pedestrian, you are in extreme danger. Another spot, surprisingly, is when you get down towards Market Basket. There's the land juts out in such a way that the easiest solution is to walk in the road. And a lot of people do that. They do it with shopping carts, they do it with, you know, it's just hard to believe what goes on there. So there are things that just plain have to be solved. So I don't know what process you go through to figure out the best solution, but the solution at this point is basically mandatory. Any questions?
Questions, committee? Thank you, Doug. Anyone else like to, please come forward, name and address?
My name is John
No,
Tupfer.
at the microphone. The minute taker can't hear you.
I apologize. My name is John Tupfer, from Brick House Tile, which is just south of Kit Road. We're going to be impacted heavily by this. I don't disagree with this project. I think it's a great idea. My only concern is the ability for trucks that I get on a daily basis to get in and out of my parking lot. If you put a raised median in, I don't know whether that's going to allow them the ability to do that. A turning lane or a non-raised median would, because they would have enough room to get in and out. Even turning right, I mean, some trucks come in from the left and turn in because they're big, but now they'll be forced to go down to the roundabout, come back, and try to turn right into the parking lot, which is going to be difficult for a tractor trailer or for a 32-foot box truck. And even then, how do they get out? So now they come in, they pull up, and they back in. If there's a raised median, I don't know if they're going to be able to do that. So I just wanted to express that concern, and that I'll be left with trying to figure out how I'm going to deal with my deliveries. Now, if you don't do a raised medium all the way to the roundabout, and you end it past Kit Street, and you end it before you get to my lot, that would be great. But it all really depends on what you guys decide to do. Any questions for me?
Nope.
All right.
Thanks for coming and speaking. Good to see you. Anyone else want to address the committee at this point? Yep.
Good evening, Drew Bryanton, 30 Nelson Street. I'm chair of the Bicycle Pedestrian Pathway Advisory Committee. Just to start off, for a couple moments ago, sidewalks, I'll just touch on that quickly, are included in the our BPAC project list. Often these hinge on the CIP budget, but we always welcome specific requests from the public and various committees to look at certain projects, so happy to do that. With regards to Lower Winchester Street, I commend the steering committee for their recommendation to include multimodal infrastructure in the recommendation. I would just remember the comment from Jeff Speck that if we make bigger roads, we'll just have more traffic. So it really feels like the impetus here is to improve the flow of the traffic through this corridor. And I think the roundabouts do a great job of doing that, improving the flow, not just the speed. Court, do you know the speed limit of this section of road?
It's posted for 30.
30, okay, perfect. So we're not trying to zip people through, we're trying to get them to move through in a manageable behavior. So I think the accommodations from between the sidewalk and then the bike lanes are a great addition to the project, so we definitely support that. And I think the engineer leaned on the complete street guidelines, which is, again, something that this committee has adopted. So when we look to how we can design the project using the complete street guidelines is a great baseline to have. And then I'll just remind that Upper Winchester Street is a gateway street per Keene's complete street design guidelines. So being able to maintain that connectivity to Upper Winchester Street, I think would be really important. And finally, while allowing for that connectivity to Upper Winchester, the project as a whole allows for connectivity to existing infrastructure. So we talked a lot about Criff Road. Obviously, there's a connection there to the existing rail trail as well. And then I know it's a ways off, but the fact that Swansea's already signed off on their end of the project to move forward with the multimodal transportation, I think is a good sign that there's willingness on both sides of the border to make this project multimodal friendly. Thank you so much.
Thank you for speaking. Anyone else like to speak to the committee? Councilor Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Philip Jones, City Councilor. Just three brief things. One was on the roundabouts. I remember us discussing this with, not many of you remember this. Mr. Barry Crown came over from the United Kingdom. Court remember him, and you might remember, Mr. Chair, and his Rodell, Randy might, his Rodell software.
He wanted the roundabouts to go the other way, though.
Yeah, yeah, the British way.
The British way. No.
But we did have him take a peek at that part, that section of the road, because there were so many problems with left turns while he was in town. And he did say at the time that roundabouts can help fix that. People were continuously would be able to make the right turns and then go around the roundabouts. And I'll give you a good example. Sometimes I have people come into town for work, and they stay overnight at the Best Western. And when they check out in the morning, they ask the front desk, how do I get to Keene? And the people at the front desk always say the safest way is make a right going out, pull into one of the car dealerships, and then come back up, because it's too dangerous to make that left turn. So I'm so glad we're addressing that. And one little last piece, we keep talking about housing, and there's one little piece that goes with this. And I remember when Bobby Williams first came on the city council, he said to me, why are we not developing Magnolia Way? And one of the reasons was the market value wasn't there, because coming out of Magnolia Way was a failed left turn, and also going in. This would fix that, and we've already done a site visit. We know there's going to be about 5 more buildings on Magnolia Way. But this helps, this makes it safer, this brings up the value of those homes, and we need to keep looking forward for things like this. And thank you to the special committee and to this committee for taking a careful look at this.
Thank you. Anyone else want to speak this evening, or? We're not, I don't imagine that we're going to make a decision this evening. I think this was a very good educational start to the process. However, the good news is this committee meets, we've swapped dates with the PLD committee, so we meet October 11th.
I think, Mr. Chairman, I think on October 11th, you're primarily going to be dealing with one issue.
Maybe.
That seems to be the recommendation from the manager's office, and I guess I'm not necessarily in disagreement. I think you're going to be spending quite an evening of discussion. Right now, the next committee meeting would be the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, but we have suggested to the clerk and the manager, and I'm sure the clerk has or will be touching base with you. We're recommending that either that you move it up to the Tuesday of that week, and this will probably be the only item on it, and that would be probably the good night to deal with this. I do just certainly have one request before you sort of wrap up. If there's anything the committee right now thinks, after hearing everything, if there's anything you would like for staff and our consultant to bring back at the next committee meeting, please let us know. Or in the next week or so, Mr. Chair, if maybe through you, if any of the committee members comes up with a question or some additional information, they could pass it on to you, and you can pass it on to the city engineer, and we can then bring that information back as part of the next meeting.
Okay, I'm going to be asking for something of a menu for these different sections and the different choices, so we can move through a decision tree.
Okay.
And get this dealt with. And whether it's October 11th or whenever, seeing the date of 2020 or whatever for the actual construction.
2020, well, we're anticipating, as city engineer will say, he's anticipating 2026, just because It will probably take a year to go through the property acquisitions, and we'll have the information for those in late 2024.
But this committee is capable of making a decision, and moving it. Yes. Not 2 years, yes.
Thank you. I would ask city staff if you could present some statistics and numbers on the impact of no left turns would have on other, like the businesses on that street. If there is a way to even obtain those numbers.
We'll certainly take a
or
look
project.
at. Right, we'll take a look. I think they do have some numbers on how many left turns were occurring as part of the traffic work. Yes, I'm seeing nods, so we can indicate to you, provide information about like how many turns are occurring today, et cetera, on that. Yes.
Yeah, I want to know more so for the, having that center lane, shared center lane versus putting that median and how that would impact those businesses.
And I'm gonna take a wild guess. Right now, it seems like the idea of a median at least down to Kit Street seems to be favor. What we'll be talking about is sort of looking at the left turns south of where that would end there,
Yes.
sort of where the tile property is, et cetera. Okay.
Yeah.
Also, if you can add to that, Court, I know just this past year, I've seen a couple of serious accidents on left-hand turns going across there. So if we could have the accident report of the Lower Winchester Street over the last year or two, that'd be good.
Okay.
And I'd like to hear the engineering question that Brickhouse
Sure.
raised.
Regarding
turning
truck
movements.
turning movements into the driveways along
Should
that
be a
west
pretty
side.
Straight up.
Yep.
Yes or no? Okay, anybody, members of the public, anything further? This will come back. It's aiming to go on more time at this moment.
And our meeting did get switched.
Well, I know our meeting's switched, but whether it's at the next meeting or in October or not will be for me and the manager. Yeah,
All set. Move to put the issue on more time until the next meeting to be determined.
correct.
Second.
Second? Motion's been made and seconded to put this on more time. And anything further from the public or committee? Nope. All in favor? Thank you. Thank you, thank you. And if anyone wants to stretch a little before we get into the next bit, it might be interesting. So if anyone wants to stand up and just breathe a little. The next item on the agenda is regarding the reconstruction of New Hampshire Route 101 from east of Optical Avenue to Branch Road.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Don Luce, your city engineer, once again. I'm just going to do a quick introduction. The New Hampshire DOT actually approached Court and I and asked.
1 second. We're still in session. Can you take the conversations out to the hall? Hello back there.
Hi, Doug.
The New Hampshire DOT approached Court and I and asked to be able to do a public officials orientation meeting, if you will, on this project. This is a project that came through the state's 10-year plan, and it's been on the books for a while. The city has some work that we're going to be doing sort of in conjunction with, and I'll talk about that after they're done. But I just wanted to kind of introduce it and turn it over to the project manager with DOT is Mr. Dave Smith. I think he's here.
I am.
He is. So with that, enjoy. And hopefully he won't be as long-winded as me.
Good evening, and thank you for that introduction. As Don mentioned, my name is Dave Smith. I am the project manager for this project, which is Keene 41590. Thank you for the opportunity to present tonight. Greetings to the public officials and members of the public. With me tonight, I have Rob Faulkner from Clough Harbor Associates, and also with the DOT is Chris Kozlowski in the audience, and then Ellen Mosier from Clough Harbor as well. So with that, just want to do a very brief introduction, and I'm going to turn this over to Rob to do a more detailed presentation for the project, getting into some of the scope of the improvements and our goals as we progress forward with this project. So with that, Rob?
Thanks, Dave. So again, my name is Rob Faulkner from CHA, and this is an introductory meeting. We plan on being in front of the committee several times between now and when the project reaches its conclusion. What we're going to do tonight is I'm just going to briefly go over the project and discuss the purpose of the project, as well as the project need, look at the overall project segment, talk briefly about the resource assessments that we've done to date, what our public outreach efforts are going to be moving forward, give you a preliminary schedule, and then we'll open it up to questions. So this is for improvements to a segment of Route 101. Really begins east of Optical Ave and heads to the east approximately 1 mile to Branch Road. The purpose of the project is to improve the pavement, to improve the drainage, and to improve bicycle and pedestrian accommodations. There's also an existing bridge over the Branch River that is on the state's red list, so we'll be addressing that bridge deficiency as well. And then also look at the safety issues that exist at the current Swansea Factory Road and Route 101 intersection. So here's a project overview. Highlighted in red is the Route 101 corridor, again, beginning east of Optical Ave, really right in the vicinity of where the Stone Arch Bridge trail terminus is. Continues to the east about 1 mile to Branch Road, and then you can see towards the bottom there a segment of Swansea Factory Road as well. Just looking a little closer at the project segment, the project area is highlighted in yellow. You can see the Branch River parallels a lot of the Route 101 corridor, especially as you get towards the eastern end of the project, approaching Branch Road. At Branch Road, Otter Brook comes down and joins a confluence of the Minnewawa Brook, and that's what forms the Branch River, which then flows into the Asheville. The Route 101 bridge over the Branch River, as I'd mentioned before, is on the state's red list. It was built in 1933. It's a cast-in-place concrete rigid frame, and one of the things that we will be doing as part of this project is evaluating whether or not that bridge can be rehabilitated and widened, or if it needs to be fully replaced. You can see the picture on the upper right shows the narrow shoulders on the existing bridge. The lower left is the underside of the bridge where you can see some of the staining and the delaminations and spalling that's occurred over the years. The center picture is the elevation of the bridge with a stone facade, and then the lower right picture really shows some of the more significant deterioration on the outside of the fascia portions of the bridge. So the project need is really Route 101 is a major east-west route in the state. It's one of two in southern New Hampshire, and it's vital to the commerce, commuting, and tourism that use the corridor. It's also one of the gateways to the city of Keene. The pavement's in poor condition. As part of the original construction back in 1933, there was a concrete slab that was built that's about 20 feet wide. Over the last 90 years, that concrete slab has deteriorated, and that deterioration is reflected up through the bituminous concrete, resulting in potholes, which is a constant maintenance concern for district. There's also poor drainage through much of the corridor, and there's no water quality treatment, so the roadway runoff discharges essentially directly into the Branch River being untreated. I'd mentioned that the bridge is on the red list, and the Swansea Factory Road intersection safety is a concern. You can see the picture in the middle there is the existing site distance from Swansea Factory Road looking west towards the city of Keene, and you can see how the bridge railing and the roadway geometry really impedes the ability to look down that way for oncoming traffic. And then lastly, the corridor is challenging for bicyclists and pedestrians, and you can see the picture in the lower right. The narrow shoulders make it difficult for bicyclists and pedestrians to navigate the roadway with the high vehicle traffic. What we're looking to do along Route 101 is really not make significant changes to the 101 alignment. The existing roadway right now is about 24 feet wide as far as a travelway, and the shoulders that are out there vary from about 2 to 4 feet, and in some instances there really is no shoulder at all. In certain segments of the roadway, you can see on the top existing typical section. The Branch River does come in very close proximity to the roadway, and the roadway side slopes actually do extend down to the Branch River. The bottom image is the proposed Route 101 typical section, where really we're going to be maintaining that 24-foot wide travel lane, but formalize the shoulders to 5 feet wide, which will provide that better bicycle and pedestrian accommodations. And again, looking to minimize, or if not eliminate, any impacts to the Branch River as we do that widening. When we look at Swansea Factory Road and some of the initial ideas that we had for being able to improve the safety of Swansea Factory Road are highlighted here in blue. If we start to the left, on either side, there's 2 potential alignments that parallel the Stone Arch Bridge. We are looking at these because there's very wide right-of-way in that vicinity. So the proposed roadway alignment could parallel the Stone Arch Bridge and the rail trail. Moving a little bit to the right in the center there would be another offline alternative where that would require a new bridge crossing of the Branch River and relocate the intersection about 700 feet to the west of the existing Swansea Factory Road intersection. Moving to the right is where the existing intersection is, and we're going to look to see if there's anything that we can do at that location to improve the sight distance, whether that's a combination of widening or rehabilitating the bridge or doing something with the roadway approaches to improve that sight distance. And then the alternative furthest to the right, we'd be looking at the old abandoned railroad spur corridor that goes right behind the Fastener Mill building right now, and possibly being able to relocate Swansea Factory Road behind that facility and basically square up a new intersection opposite the industrial area. The Swansea Factory Road typical section that we'd be looking at would be 11-foot lanes with 5-foot shoulders. So that would provide, again, enhanced pedestrian bicycle accommodations in that vicinity as well. When we look at the Branch River, the project corridor is within the Branch River floodplain and floodway. It was most recently studied in the 2006 flood insurance study by FEMA. We are currently replicating that FEMA model so that we can perform detailed hydraulic analysis of the alternatives for the widening of potential impacts into the floodway and floodplain, as well as bridge alternatives. And as part of our analysis, we will be looking at compensatory storage and mitigation for any floodplain impacts that may occur as part of those alternatives. Looking at the water quality issues, as I mentioned before, the existing stormwater runoff really discharges directly into the Branch River without any treatment. So our proposed design is going to look to improve that water quality and stormwater treatment. We will be following NHDES and the City of Keene water quality standards. And while the City of Keene is not technically an MS4 community, we will be striving to meet the city's MS4 guidelines and requirements as we move the project forward. In doing that, we'll be looking at best management practices, stormwater management areas that will hopefully be on-site within the project corridor, but if necessary, we might look off-site as well. And then lastly, there is an existing Tier 1 stream that comes down from the north near Thompson Road, near the Swansea Factory Road intersection. That's shown in the center graphic. To the left is the inlet where that Tier 1 stream goes into, I believe it's a 36-inch culvert. And then as it comes down through the commercial area there, it actually combines with the closed drainage system along Route 101 and then discharges to the Branch River. So we will be looking to be able to separate the Tier 1 stream flow from the closed drainage system that'll be collecting runoff from Route 101. To date, we've conducted much of the natural resource assessments out there. They're listed here from wetlands. We're working on the stream crossings. We've contacted the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services. We've looked at hazardous materials and contamination through the corridor. and also evaluated the Section 4F and Section 6F properties, the Cheshire Rail Trail, the Stone Arch Bridge, as well as some potentially historic properties through the corridor are subject to Section 4F. And as far as the 6F goes, there does not appear to be any impacted properties. We've also done some cultural resource assessments to date. We have reviewed the historic properties and the architecture through the corridor. As I'd mentioned before, the Stone Arch Bridge is on the National Registry. The Route 101 bridge over the Branch River is eligible to be listed on the Natural Registry. And then there are other properties, again, through the area in the South Keene area. And then we also conducted Phase 1A and 1B, some preliminary archaeological surveys. And those surveys did indicate that there are some sensitive areas and findings within the corridor that we'll need to evaluate further. Our public outreach efforts for the project include a public involvement plan that's available on the DOT's website. We have sent out several outreach letters to entities and communities in the area, 42 entities in the city of Keene, 7 entities in the town of Swansea. We will be establishing a project working group. We did have an initial meeting with Public Works, with Court and Don, to start to lay out the framework for what that project working group would be. And we will be conducting public officials meetings, this being one of them, and we'll have several more as the project progresses. There is a project-specific website that resides on the DOT's website, and we'll be conducting agency coordination meetings with the natural and cultural resource agencies as the project continues forward. And then as we complete the NEPA and environmental document for this, there will be a public comment period. And then this phase of the project will culminate in a public hearing on what will be a preferred alternative that will then be carried into final design. Looking at our preliminary project schedule right now, this preliminary engineering phase where we will be evaluating alternatives and completing that environmental documentation will continue through 2025. We're currently wrapping up our survey and base mapping of the corridor, as well as completing the remaining cultural and natural resource assessments. And through that 2-year period through 2025, we'll be evaluating several alternatives for Route 101 as well as Swansea Factory Road, and be bringing those alternatives back to this committee. And ultimately looking to have a public hearing in 2025 with the final design for the project taking place in 2026 to 2028. So that concludes our brief presentation, and welcome any questions or comments.
Yeah. I attended the DOT's 10-year plan the other evening, and the 10-year plan seems like it might be stretching out to more like a 20-year plan. Is this particular project, do you feel, going to stay on track to these dates that you're presenting?
Go ahead.
I was going to say, Dave Smith is going to make sure that we do our part to keep this project on track for public hearing in 2025 with final design occurring thereafter. So yes.
You'll sign off on that, right?
Yeah.
This is being recorded, correct?
We have a solid plan and a great team supporting the advancement of this project. So I'm confident that we'll advance in a strong manner and meet these as best we can. Now, you can never predict the interaction with the public and the coordination that we'll get from those folks, but we will commit to do our best and to meet this schedule as best we can. We have commitments in that 10-year plan that you mentioned, and so that's our charge, is to make sure that we're in compliance with that plan, meeting those timeframes.
Thank you.
Ms. Carter.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. You may be kind of wondering why have interest in this project. It's a quote-unquote Route 101. Our DOT partners, I just want you to know, Swansea Factory Road is what's referred to as a Class 5 highway. It's a city-owned street. So whatever they do on that street through this project will be turned over to the city for maintenance in perpetuity. So as they're presenting options, we'll be looking at it from staff. We'll be making recommendations to you about what does it mean. So for example, do we want to add another bridge to the city's 32 bridge inventory we already have. So that's why we're going to continue to make sure that they come speak to you, because our interest certainly is the safety on Route 101, which is a state interest, but certainly at the end of the day, Swansea Factory Road, whatever happens to it, will return to the city of Keene for maintenance responsibility and upkeep. I think Don was going to follow up with just, he mentioned earlier that we're trying to also integrate potentially in this project a city project.
Yeah, so this project has been known to us, and we've known this is coming for a while now. In the CIP right now, there is funds scheduled for the replacement of the water main through this project corridor. That water main was installed in 1914. So it's pretty much served its purpose. In the upcoming update for the CIP, we'll be truing up that cost to better line up with their defined, more defined project limits, as well as their schedule. So there'll be some adjustments there, but we certainly are working with them on that. The other thing I was going to mention, and Court kind of stole my thunder a little bit, but Swansea Factory Road is the biggest impact for the city's perspective on this. Of the alternatives that are being considered, I think some are more advantageous and desirable from the city's perspective than others. I haven't been shy about telling them that, from my perspective, anything that puts a new bridge in front of or adjacent to the Stone Arch Bridge is pretty much a non-starter. In terms of the impact that would have on kind of a cultural icon for the city, that really is very undesirable. A number of you got the comment letters that they mentioned earlier, asking for input on the project. I just want to let you know that a number of city staff, including myself, also got that. I'm going to be preparing a sort of a consolidated city staff response through the manager's office. What that response is going to say basically is that the city's preference is the easternmost alternative be the most heavily considered, with almost the sort of going in decreasing desirability from right to left. If this committee has a different opinion than that, I'd certainly like to hear it before the staff opines in writing. But that's where we're leaning. The other thing I'll mention, and I discussed this on Wednesday or Tuesday, that the Monday. When was it? At the 10-year plan meeting. Project actually represents or presents an interesting opportunity for us. Rob mentioned the difficulty and the challenges presented by this corridor to bicycle and pedestrian traffic. And we have a ready-made solution to offer them in the form of the Prowse Bridge. And we will be sort of formally requesting that the DOT include the construction or placement of the Prowse Bridge connecting the Stone Arch to the Eastern Avenue section of the Transportation Heritage Trail as part of their project. It checks off that, makes a real improvement in terms of pedestrian benefits, but it also makes a lot of sense from a sort of practical and economical perspective to try to do that as one project rather than have them rebuild 101 and then us come back a couple of years later and tear it up to put in the bridge. So I know they've been receptive to that idea. Of course, the devil's in the details, but we will be working through that. And that's all.
Good job. Sounds good. Any committee questions at this point?
No, nice presentation.
Just to say that one thing I'd love to see in the long run would be a safe bicycle route between Marlborough and Keene. And this fills in an important link in that connection. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. Anyone in the public like to speak? Anyone else?
I have one thing to offer to the.
No,
to the
he's coming up. And then I'll
Okay.
get back to you.
No, after you. Go ahead, please.
He's a friend, so I could pick on him.
Chuck Redfern, 9 Colby Street. There is, just so you know, for the project that the city's working on for the transportation, what's referred to as a Transportation Heritage Trail. You probably know it by numbers, I know it by a name, and I'm part of a group that fundraises the local share of money towards, say we get a grant for 80%, the city kicks in a certain percentage and we try and kick in 10%. Historically, we've been very successful doing that. But, you know, for the cost of a bridge, it might be a harder reach for us than usual, but we're gonna make every attempt to do that. And with that strong public support, there is the expectation that this project is not gonna be pushed out, you know, beyond the contemplated time that I hear about with this project. I strongly support the idea of doing two at one time. It just makes common sense to me. I did hear from someone who had overheard from somebody at Southwest Region Planning Commission that this may be pushed, not this project, but the bridge, the Prouse Bridge project, that may be pushed out beyond the 10-year plan. And that would be very concerning to the community, because we've been out there for the last 3.5 years raising funds for this project, and it's really gonna take a lot of air out of the balloon and the momentum that we have from the public. We've had a series of races where we've announced it's for the bridge, and that generates public support as well as some good funding there. Also, so what we're asking from the city council is, through this committee, is that they, the other thing I wanted to mention before I get into this, the bridge, the Prouse Bridge, is a 10-year hold for the city. We're already up to 3 or 4 years in that hold. So we've got 7, you know, about, let's see, hold bridge for 7 to 8 years left. I'm saying 7. So, you know, that's another thing to consider, that agreement. And so what I'm asking respectfully of this committee is that this be put on more time so we can square away the 10-year plan time frame. Because right now, what I heard tonight, if we can pair it up, we're within a reasonable range. However, if it goes forward at what was being said by Southwest, it could really put a kibosh to matching it up with this, and it could severely impact our ability to fundraise. Not to mention how old I'll be by that time. So that's the ask, that you put it on more time, enough for us to generate a letter to the mayor and city council. I've got another letter I'm working on. This will be that I'm assisting some folks on, but this will be a letter specific to this project that will be asking for the 10-year plan I'm not sure the composite of it, but I know our council member is a representative on that, Cindy Wormington. And so we're gonna ask for her help. Last time the city needed help from the federal delegation, a letter was written to the federal delegation asking that a project not be moved out, and that was successful. I think for the, was that the North Bridge? Charlie Bass. That was a Charlie Bass allocation. And so that's my plea tonight, is that if your recommendation says file it as informational, I'm just asking for 2 weeks more to come up with a solution for writing a letter to the delegation before the 10-year hearings are over. And I'll be attending the one of the hearings in either Peterborough or Claremont, I think, in the very near future here. Thank you for
Thank
your
you.
time.
Yeah, Mr. Director,
Thank you. I mean, I think, again, this certainly, just for the committee, what's happening right now is the state's 10-year process is going through what's referred to as the GASSET, Governor Executive Council Committee on Transportation. They are having those public hearings around the state. Most recently, they had their meeting here this past Monday night. That process continues through the fall. What then happens is then that committee then makes a recommendation to the governor and the legislature, who then has their shot at the 10-year plan after the first of the new year. I'm not quite sure what Mr. Redford, think again about creating a letter, which I think is fine, and again about putting that into the record, submitting it to both the GASSET at some point. Whether this needs to go one more time for that to happen, I'm not sure it does need to do that. I mean, I think that letter will be underway and into the city council. And then again, that can be submitted into the process at any time. You can also certainly, when it moves to the legislature next spring, you can move through our delegation to get that delegation to do an amendment to, if there's a need to get an amendment to the 10-year plan on it. So, again, my certainly thoughts and recommendation would be to continue. Again, by accepting this as informational, you're not saying we're done with the project, as you've already heard. There's going to be a local staff committee that's going to be established. We're going to be talking to you. The city engineer has indicated what he would like to see happen right now. We still haven't come to, again, on how that communication is going to move forward with. But my recommendation would be to continue with what's on your agenda for this evening while all this other stuff can process.
I would suggest you, Chuck, send in a letter to council for the next committee, the next council meeting, requesting this letter, and anything else you want to request, because basically we have heard the presentation and we're done with the presentation, but that's a whole new action. A couple of nodding heads. Wow, good. Yes, Councilor Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a few hats in this ring as a city councilor. Also on the State House representation on the Transportation Committee. But the one I'm most proud of is I'm with Chuck on the Board of Directors of Pathways for Keene, where we raised the money for these trails. And all I would ask is what our city engineer already said is to try and combine the projects.
Yeah.
That would be what's best. We put good money out for that Prowse Bridge. We paid $1, and we want to get our money's worth for that. I know the House Speaker is from Londonderry, and he knows I'm from Keene, and he keeps saying to me, "When are you going to get that thing the heck out of here?" And the other thing I wanted to ask is, you mentioned the historic value of the Stone Arch Bridge. That's going to be part of our trail heading south. If there is some state money we can get to help refurbish and strengthen that bridge, because it's not ready to be part of our trail yet. But because of its historic value, we might be able to get some state money for that part of it too, and that should be in the letter.
Okay, whatever you want in the letter. Good. Anyone else want to address the committee or this item?
Nope.
Yep, Councilor Roberts.
Like Kurt said, this presentation was on 101. We're here to decide whether we like this thing on 101 and go. Yes, we want 101 to go. Then that's the issue in front of us tonight. The second part, the secondary ones, yes, we would like to add on to these to get the items done. The water main, the bridge and bicycle lanes. If we can, that's what we want to do because it's best for everybody, it's best financially. but those areas are, if we can. And so tonight, like I said, is on 101, and like the chair said, that's up to the other people to get the letter to the city council to go from there.
Good, okay. Anything further? Motion, please.
I move to place this item on more time.
A second, please. All right, the chair seconds. Oh, more time?
Yeah, that wasn't the motion.
Oh, sorry, you doing? Oh,
I'm sorry, I accept this.
You weren't. supposed-
Correction.
Wait, you weren't supposed to do the motion at all. You jumped the gun and did it wrong.
Here you go, Chris.
Move to recommend the acceptance of the presentation of reconstruction of New Hampshire Route 101 from east of Optical Avenue to Branch Road as information.
That's what I said.
Second.
And the
second agreed with that.
Absolutely.
We were just beaten to death in the last presentation. I'm sorry. Anything further from the public or committee? Seeing none, all in favor? Boom, done,
Said it's to your
unanimous.
Yeah, you were listening.
I thank the members of the public that were here, counselors that were here, consultants, and city staff that was here. And we are done, adjourned. Have a good evening.
Take care. Have a great evening.
I was getting all set to submit it.
You were right about
Double checking.